It was summer 1997 when I moved to Evansville, Colorado. It was supposed to be a pit stop, a cheap place along my route, hopefully to make some money to take me the rest of the way to California. I had some friends living in San Francisco that I'd planned to crash with until getting on my feet, but even paying for 1/4 of an apartment in San Francisco cost way more money than I had to my name, which, after staying in motels and eating out for several weeks, was almost zero. It was in Evansville that I met Tony Ridaldo. I saw his name on a flyer in the town's visitor center. Looking for a plumber's assistant. No experience needed. Competitive pay. Usually, competitive pay was code for we pay shit, but I decided to give it a shot anyway. I called him from a pay phone, thinking he wouldn't answer as it was late in the day. Hello? He asked in the gruff voice of someone who'd spent decades smoking. Hi, I'm calling about the job, I replied. He paused for a moment before saying, what's your name? Forrest. You local? No, I actually just got to town earlier today. Again, he paused. I'd wondered if he'd hung up, but could hear soft breathing on the other end. I don't have much plumbing experience, I said, thinking he was waiting for me to speak. But I'm a hard worker and a fast learner. You know how to hold a wrench. I told him I was good with tools, as I used to work in my dad's wood shop, which was mostly true, though he usually only had me hold things stable or sweep the shop. He was always scared to have me use the saws, saying he couldn't afford to have a doctor sew my finger back on if I sawed one off. He said I had all the experience I needed and introduced himself as Tony. We agreed to an in-person interview the next day. The interview was held at this small warehouse on the east side of town. The little Camry that my dad left me had trouble with those mountainous roads, whining and whirring every time it took a slope. It thankfully made it to the warehouse with little time to spare. Tony was waiting outside, smoking a cigarette when I arrived. He was a large man, at least 6'3", with a pot belly and thick glasses. He waved at me to follow him inside. The inside was filled with PVC pipes and shelves containing everything from brand new tools to cleaning supplies to loose wood panels. I would have thought he was running some sort of miscellaneous hardware store out of the place. Got everything you need, I suppose, I said to him while looking around. Yup, he said. Just me here and ordering supplies takes a while, so I tend to hoard the stuff I need. He led me to an office in the back with dim lighting and a desk stained white with paint. You said your name is Forrest, right? He asked. Yes, sir, I replied. Forrest Aldez. Where are you from, Forrest? North Carolina. A small town called Louisville. Long way from home. Yeah, it was time for a change. He paused. Well, to tell you the truth, I just need someone I can trust. That's me, sir, I replied with a smile. He leaned back in his chair and nodded. We sat in silence for a moment, making me wonder if I was supposed to say something. Eventually, Tony leaned forward and met my eyes. Family? He asked. Got some cousins that I don't really talk to back home, I replied. And I never really knew my mom. And your dad? I shifted in my seat. He passed away. A few months ago. Sorry to hear that. Nah, I said. He was sick for a long time. I think it was for the best. He smiled to himself and nodded. We sat in silence for another moment as his eyes drifted to a picture frame on his desk. He smiled at it and then turned it around. There were 3 people in the picture, all standing arm in arm in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. Tony himself, a thin woman, and a young boy with shaggy blonde hair. I leaned forward and smiled. Beautiful family you got there. He turned the picture back and smiled. Yes, thank you. Family is important. The most important thing there is. You're right about that, I said, smiling. He stared at the picture for another few moments before turning back to me as if he'd forgotten I was even there. Well, Forrest, I think you'd be a great addition to the team, and by team, I mean me, he said with a laugh. He leaned over to shake my hand, and I shook it back. I was prepared to talk money, but before I could say anything, he told me the salary, which was less than I hoped, but more than I expected. Either way, it was more than my current pay of $0 per year. He stood and took my hand. You'll start tomorrow, he said. The jobs with Tony took up most of the day. And he was right, there wasn't a lot to most of the jobs, at least on my end. Install some pipes here, unclog a sink there. He handled all the difficult stuff. And when I needed help with the easy stuff, he never made me feel stupid about it. Not like bosses I had in the past who made me feel like a Neanderthal for not being able to do something perfectly that I just learned. One day, we were working in the crawl space under a house. I always hated small spaces, which is why staying at that cheap motel was a mindfuck. My dad said it was because of something that happened when I was younger, but he never told me what it was. Sometimes, I dream about being in a dark enclosed space with someone yelling outside, but I'm not sure if that's an actual memory. The crawl space was dark, dusty, and full of spiderwebs with bits of light peeking through thin cracks in the wood. Tony was right outside, searching for the water main, while I was tasked with looking under the house for leaks. It was fine at first, but the deeper I crawled, and the more that spiderwebs covered my face, the faster my heart beat. I bit my lip and took several deep breaths, telling myself to stop being a pussy. A breeze blew by. I didn't know how that was possible in the enclosed space, but it carried with it a soft sound. I clocked it as a man's voice, but told myself I was hearing things. It came again, this time a bit louder. It wasn't Tony's voice, but one I recognized. Forrest, he said. I closed my eyes and shook my head. The light from the cracks disappeared. Stop, stop, I told myself. Forrest, help. Stop. I cried before crawling towards the only source of light I could find. You have to, Forrest. Stop. 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 I continued to yell while diving into the light of the open air. Tears covered my face, and my heart beat like a bass drum. I couldn't stop my hands and legs from shaking as I rolled into a ball on the ground. A hand touched my back, bringing me back to reality. I took several deep breaths and looked around to see the still, silent woods staring back at me. Tony was standing behind me, wearing a sympathetic smile. "Come on, let us grab a beer," Tony said. There was only one bar in town as far as I could tell. This small place, called the Watering Hole, that looked almost like a rundown gas station from the outside. Tony went to the bar to order drinks while I sat at a table near the back. One of the men a few tables over lifted his head and met my eyes. He stared for a moment, then looked at Tony before putting his head back down. He soon returned with 2 beers, setting one in front of me before taking a big swig of the other. "Good work today," he said. "Thanks," I said with a soft laugh. "Guess you didn't expect to hire such a pussy." He sighed. "Nothing wrong with getting scared, son. Fear is evolutionary, as they say. Ingrained in us to tell us something is wrong." "Yeah," I said, thinking that fear was built in us to prevent us from getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers, not to make us about piss ourselves cause the lights went off. We sat in silence for another few minutes, working slowly on the beers. "I'm really sorry, Tony," I said. I don't know." He cocked his head at me, then turned to the bar. "2 shots of Jack," he called. He